You hear it before you see her, the soft rattle of a glass vial tucked deep inside a mother's apron. In Victorian England, it was the sound no one spoke about, yet nearly every home carried it. A tiny bottle, promising relief, and quietly stealing lives. Tonight, you'll follow one mother through the fog of addiction, her world of whispered secrets, desperate choices, and the fragile hope she still clings to. And maybe, by the end, you'll understand why so many women like her never truly meant to fall, only to survive. The winter of 1884 crept into London like a quiet thief, slipping under doors, clinging to shawls, settling in the bones of every worn-out soul trying to make it through another day. For Clara Winton, the cold wasn't just a discomfort, it was a reminder of how fragile life had become. The air stung her cheeks as she hurried through the narrow alley behind their little brick home, the familiar dull ache in her lower back flaring with every step. But she pressed on, clutching the tiny brown bottle she had just bought from the chemist. Laudanum. Morphine's gentle cousin. A mother's secret friend. A family's silent curse. Clara wasn't always like this, tired, trembling, caught between relief and guilt. There was a time, not very long ago, when her world was filled with the sound of her daughter giggling as Clara stitched ribbons on tiny dresses. When her husband Henry still looked at her with the softness of first love. When the future felt wide and kind. But grief changes the shape of days. It began the night little Thomas died. Their 3-year-old boy, warm in her arms one evening, cold and still the next morning. Fever, the doctor said. Just fever. As if a single word could ever make sense of how the world could take a child so quickly. After that, Clara's lungs felt too tight to breathe. Sleep slipped from her grasp. Her bones grew heavy with a pain she could not name. And when the doctor handed her laudanum in a glass bottle, saying it would steady the nerves, she clung to it as if it were a rope thrown into a storm. At first, it helped. A few drops in tea and the world softened. The ache in her chest loosened, just enough to let her move again. Just enough to let her smile for Henry, though the smile never quite reached her eyes. But grief is greedy. 1 spoonful became 2. 2 became 3. And soon, the line between needing and craving blurred like fog rolling over the Thames. Still, no one suspected. Mothers, especially grieving ones, were expected to be fragile. Doctors prescribed laudanum the way one might offer sugar. Chemists sold it as harmless. Neighbors whispered about Clara's fading strength, but no one thought to ask why her steps grew unsteady or why her hands trembled even when she wasn't cold. Tonight, as Clara stepped inside her dimly lit kitchen, the silence pressed against her like a weight. Henry was still at the factory, working late shifts to make up for the hours Clara could no longer manage as a seamstress. Their daughter, Mary, slept upstairs, soft breaths floating through the floorboards. Clara unscrewed the bottle. The smell of bitter alcohol rose toward her, sharp and familiar. Just enough to quiet the pain, she whispered to herself. Her hand shook as she poured the amber liquid into a spoon. She hated herself for it. Hated the way her fingers twitched until the medicine reached her lips. Hated the relief that washed over her moments later, warm and heavy like an embrace she didn't deserve. Her world slowed. Her thoughts drifted. And for a brief moment, she felt like the Clara she used to be. But moments don't last. A knock at the door jolted her, the spoon rattling against the table. Her heart lurched. Quickly, she slipped the bottle back into her apron pocket. When she opened the door, she found Mrs. Hawthorne, her neighbor, standing under the dim glow of a lantern. She was a sharp-eyed woman with a heart too big for her own good. "Clara, dear, you look pale," she said softly, stepping inside before Clara could protest. "Have you eaten today?" Clara forced a smile. "Yes, of course. I've just been tired." Mrs. Hawthorne's gaze lingered on her trembling hands. But instead of asking the questions that burned in her eyes, she simply reached out and squeezed Clara's shoulder. "You don't have to carry everything alone, you know," she murmured. Clara swallowed hard. If only she could believe that. Later that night, when Henry returned home, Clara was sitting by the fire, staring at the flickering embers. He kissed her forehead and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You look worn out, my love," he whispered. "Is it your back again? Should I call the doctor?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "I'm fine, Henry. Truly." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes filled with concern. But he said nothing more. Clara felt his silence settle like dust on her skin. She knew he sensed something was wrong. But she also knew he didn't understand how deep the darkness had grown inside her. And she didn't know how to tell him. That night, long after Henry fell asleep, Clara crept downstairs. The house was silent, the fire nothing more than a smoldering glow. She sat at the table, pulled the bottle from her apron, and held it in her shaking hands. She hated the way she needed it. She hated the way it lied to her. But most of all, she hated that she wasn't strong enough to stop. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the narrow street in white. Inside, a mother sat alone in the quiet glow of her kitchen, caught in the thin space between relief and ruin. And somewhere deep inside her heart, a small voice whispered, "This cannot be your life forever." But she wasn't ready, yet, to listen. The new year arrived quietly, with gray skies and frost clinging to the edges of every windowpane. Clara woke with a strange heaviness in her chest. Not sorrow, at least not the familiar kind, but the weight of a choice she wasn't ready to name. Mary's laughter broke through the morning stillness, soft, sweet, and so achingly alive. Clara stood in the doorway, watching her daughter play with a wooden doll Henry had carved. Mary's golden curls bounced as she spun, her small hands moved with the innocence of someone untouched by the bruises life could leave on hearts. Clara pressed a hand over her apron pocket. The bottle was still there. Always there. But today, for the first time in months, Clara hesitated before touching it. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Hawthorne stepped inside, carrying a pot of warm broth. "Thought you might need this," she said. "You and Mary both." Clara managed a grateful smile. "Thank you. You're too kind." As the older woman set the pot down, her eyes fell to Clara's trembling fingers. "Clara. I've seen this before," she whispered gently. "Years ago. My own sister." Clara's breath caught. Her throat tightened. "She lost a child too," Mrs. Hawthorne continued. "Grief nearly swallowed her. And the laudanum," her voice cracked. "It took more than her pain away." Clara sank into a chair. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I never meant to depend on it. It just quiets everything." Mrs. Hawthorne knelt beside her. "I know, dear. But it's taking pieces of you with it." For a long moment, Clara's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back. Mrs. Hawthorne pulled her close, holding her as if she were her own daughter. "You still have time to take your life back," she whispered. But breaking free was not so simple. That night, Clara tried. She truly did. She placed the bottle on the shelf instead of taking it to bed. She curled beside Henry and closed her eyes, determined to face the restless storm in her veins without the drug. But as the hours dragged on, her body screamed. Her bones ached. Sweat coated her skin. Her thoughts spiraled into panic. Every breath felt like climbing a mountain. By dawn, she was curled on the floor of the kitchen, shaking uncontrollably. When Henry found her, his face went pale. "Clara? What's happening?" Shame flooded her eyes. She couldn't speak. But Henry wasn't angry. He wasn't confused. He simply gathered her trembling body in his arms and held her as tightly as he could. "I'm here," he whispered. "Whatever this is, we'll face it together." For the first time, Clara allowed herself to cry in front of him. To admit what she had been hiding in shadows. And Henry didn't turn away. The days that followed were some of the hardest she had ever lived. Mrs. Hawthorne brought warm meals. Henry stayed home from work when he could. Clara's body raged, trembled, and begged for the drug she refused to give it. But through every hour, Mary's laughter echoed in the house, soft and bright. A reminder of the life Clara still had to live. Slowly, painfully, the fog began to lift. Clara noticed small things again, the way light fell through the window at dawn, the warmth of Henry's hand in hers, the quiet joy of brushing Mary's hair. These tiny moments stitched her back together, thread by thread. After 3 weeks, the bottle still sat untouched on the shelf. One cold evening, Clara took it down. She held it in her hands, feeling its weight. This little bottle had taken so much from her: time, strength, clarity, hope. But no more. She opened the back door and walked into the crisp night air. Moonlight glowed on the frost-covered ground. With a deep breath, she tipped the bottle and let the laudanum spill onto the cold earth. The liquid soaked into the soil, disappearing drop by drop. Clara watched until the very last of it was gone. For the first time in months, she felt free. Inside, Mary's laughter floated through the house. Henry waited by the fire, a blanket draped over one arm, concern and love written across his face. Clara stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and whispered, "I'm coming back to you. Both of you." Henry pulled her into his arms. Mary ran toward her, wrapping small arms around Clara's waist. In that moment, Clara realized something simple and profound. Hope does not replace pain. But it gives you the strength to walk through it. And so, in a quiet little home on a narrow London street, a mother began her life again, not free of grief, but no longer chained to it. Because healing, like love, grows slow and steady. And even in the darkest winter, warmth finds a way to return.